And so I went from having this glamorous life to being treated as a second-class citizen and being poor. Now we're not, thank God. I'm super proud of myself and of my family and everything we've been able to achieve, but that wasn't the reality for us for many years. So work ethic is the biggest lesson I've learned. I've never felt living here in America that there was something I wouldn't be able to accomplish.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the one and only Jewish Personal Branding Podcast. I'm David Cobby, and I'm excited to bring you yet another fellow Minnesotan on the podcast. And before I introduce her, I want to remind everybody that they should absolutely be following Schmoozing Time on the Gram, Facebook, and TikTok. This is where I post the best highlights from each episode, and I'd love if everybody could give the show a follow across these platforms. On today's episode, you'll be hearing from a Ukrainian immigrant who was formerly a childhood actress and singer and currently hosts the podcast People Do Want to Know. She also has tons of experience within product management and is the inventor of the pun, "You schmooze, you lose." Fresh off her podcast with the great Modi Rosenfeld, please welcome to my show, Margarita Lyadova. Margarita, how are we doing today?
Hey, David, thanks so much for having me. I'm great. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I am so excited for this podcast. Margarita and I had a little bit of a delay with a little bit of a power outage, but very excited to have you on the podcast and Schmooze. Obviously, it's always great to have fellow Minnesotans on. And we could get right into our Jewish geography profile, actually. Are you ready for that, Margarita?
Yeah, I can't wait.
Let's do it. All right. So where in Ukraine were you born and how long did you stay in Ukraine for?
I am from Donetsk, Ukraine, which is the area close to the Russian border. It has been occupied by Russian forces since 2013. Mm-hmm. So that's the place you hear about the war for an additional 8 years. That's Donetsk. I am not even sure that I'll be able to return to Donetsk in my lifetime, that I'll legally be able to go, because right now you can't go there. It's a war zone. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for the second part of your question, I moved to America when I was 9 years old in 2006 from Donetsk. And I moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Let's go. Minneapolis, Minnesota, fellow Minnesotans on the podcast. You know we love Minnesotans here. Margarita, so where did you go to college and what was your college major?
For undergrad, I went to the University of Minnesota. I studied supply chain, operations management, business law, and Spanish. And for grad school, I went to UPenn and I studied behavioral science, which I like to say is just a degree for how to manipulate people professionally.
I love that. A lot of schooling, supply chain major here also. We love supply chain majors, and we'll talk about supply chain later on in the episode. So, Margarita, I'm going to give you a Jewish scenario, okay? You stub your toe on the corner of your bubby's couch, right? Possibly the worst thing that can happen to you. What is the first Jewish Yiddish saying that comes to mind as you exclamate in anger and pain? What do you say? What's your go-to anger word in Yiddish, I guess?
I have two. It depends. One is I love the word drek, which is crap. Drek. Just stuff you don't need, stuff that you want to toss. And the second is a phrase. It's not a word. Kishen tuchas, which means kiss ass. Kiss my ass. Yeah.
Those are great phrases. I feel like I need to use those more when I stub my toe, because usually for me it's I'll stub my toe and I'll say something in English, but I feel like that's kind of boring and too mainstream, whatever. But definitely Yiddish phrases, I feel like they're very underrated. And I was actually talking to Ilan Snelnikov, who's the founder of SSI. We were talking about what languages are the most intense and angry. I feel like Yiddish has got to be up there as the most one of the more angry languages. Do you agree with that?
I don't know. I think Russian's angrier, and German. German's number one on my list.
You know what? That's I definitely can see that. All right. Final question of the Jewish geography profile. If you could meet any famous Jewish person, alive, biblical times, whatever, who would you want to meet?
Can I give two? Can I give one modern, one biblical?
Go for it.
Modern, Jack Black, obviously. And then biblical, I have so many, but probably Noah.
Ooh, okay, Noah's Ark. I like that.
Noah's the first entrepreneur of the world.
He is. He's yeah, I mean, you're right. I never thought of it like that with his ark and everything, and like it's honestly to think about like some of these stories like Noah's Ark and stuff, it's like it's crazy to think that, you know, there are all these animals like on a freaking ark with Noah, and just like the whole story, like our minds can't even comprehend what went on in the biblical days. It's so funny to like see, you know, and read all this stuff that happened in the biblical days, and then like now in present day, it's like, oh, like there's no way that happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. Some of it seems like nonsense, but it's more the moral of the story rather than the facts of the story itself.
Right. No, you're 100% right. So, all right, let's get right into your upbringing and acting career, Margarita. So, the people that listen to People Do You Want to Know podcast, which we'll get into later, know about your acting and singing career. But I feel like a lot of other people don't really know about that part of you. So I want you to talk about your acting and singing career as a kid and how it impacted you on the perspective, how it impacted your perspective on the entertainment business. Did you have sort of like a negative feeling about the entertainment business while you were doing this acting and singing, or were you passionate about it as a young child?
Interesting question. I like it. I will tell you my thoughts on this. So the reason I got into acting and singing was because my grandmother was a music teacher at public schools in Donetsk, and she had a colleague that was a really acclaimed vocal coach in the city of Donetsk. And when I was 4 years old, I had really good diction. I started speaking early. I could enunciate really well. That's actually one of the reasons I do podcasts now, is because when I speak, it's quite easy to understand. So she brought me to this vocal teacher, and she said, "You need to hear my 4-year-old granddaughter sing for you." She said, "I don't work with kids. I only work with adults, like teenagers and up." And she said, "You don't understand. She's very talented. You have to hear her sing." And so I performed a song for the vocal instructor. The song was about a pig. Ever since I was a little girl, I have always been obsessed with pigs. Like as we speak, I have a pig on my desk now. It's a little stress ball. There are pigs everywhere. They're like hidden, but they are everywhere in my room, in my life. So the song I auditioned with was about a pig, obviously. And the vocal instructor heard me and said, "Okay, I'll take her." And I became her youngest student. And so she would find me like commercials and voice ads and little gigs to go tour around Ukraine to promote a popular ice cream brand. And I have all these commercials that I've recorded. For example, there was a huge toy store franchise in Donetsk. It's kind of like a Toys R Us. And I did voice for their commercial. And I was probably 7 at the time. And then by the time I was 9, we immigrated to America. And I came back to Ukraine for the first time when I was 13. We went to that toy store 6-7 years later. That ad was still playing. It was still my voice. That was crazy to hear your own voice after you moved to like another country across the world. You thought you'd never come back, and then you came back to Ukraine and heard your own voice at the store. Anyway, I digress. So that was kind of how I got into it. Now, your question about the entertainment sphere. I think the perception that we have of child performers in America is very different than how I grew up. First of all, you have to understand that Ukraine, when I was growing up, was effectively a third world country. Like when I went to school, we didn't have toilets. I'm not kidding. It was holes in the ground. And like you had to bring your own toilet paper. It was not provided by the school, toilet paper. Everyone had like little packs of Kleenexes that they brought. And the worst part, actually, I'll mention about that bathroom, there were no doors. There were no stalls. You like eye contact as you squat over a hole with your classmate. Yeah, it's very traumatizing. Anywho, so that's how I grew up. And so the world of child entertainment, it's not as robust as it is in the US, where they have all these royalties and agreements. Like I didn't make royalties on anything that I sang. I got a one-time fee and they forgot about me. And they're still playing my voice and they're still making money off of it, even though I've moved on and I'll never get compensated for that. So the scale of the operation is far smaller in Ukraine. And I think in some sense I was very protected because I moved when I was 9, so I wasn't that big. And usually child actors who experience severe trauma and harassment and assault, it tends to be when they're a little bit older. So I think I just didn't quite make it to know which way it would have panned out for me, which I'm grateful for. So the other thing I'll mention is that I always treated myself as an adult. I kind of still do. Like, I walk around like I have places to be kind of vibe. And I was always that way from the day that I was born. And so everyone kind of took me seriously. I wasn't viewed as a child. And like I had my own phone. I had my own chauffeur. And they would pick me up. So
Wait, this is when you were like, what, 7 years old, 8 years old?
Yeah. Yeah. And so like I kind of did everything by myself. So they didn't view me as like this little kid that could be exploited entirely. Mm-hmm. And I know that in the American show business for children and child performers, it's just different. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for me to watch. Like there was that documentary that came out about the Nickelodeon performers, like Drake and Josh, you know, all the big ones, Amanda Bynes. And I never worked like that. I went to school. I didn't sit on sets for hours at a time with all adults. My parents were always present. So I didn't just have the volume of work that they did. And that's another reason why I think I was shielded from it.
First of all, I think I just learned so much from that little 5-10 minute talk on Ukraine. Like the fact that like you had to bring your own toilet paper and you had to sit there and look at stare into your classmate's soul while you're going to the bathroom is just like unfathomable to me. Like we really take a lot of the stuff for granted in America. You moved to America at a very young age, and of all places, you moved to Minnesota, which is probably not the most ideal place for an immigrant. Coming to Minnesota with the cold winters and, you know, it's just like, it's not a great place to, I think at least, like immigrate to. And there's a lot of like downsides to immigration, obviously, right? Like you're moving, you have to learn a new language, all this stuff. But I want to kind of like go into some of the positive takeaways you had from immigration. So if there was a positive overall takeaway that you had from immigrating that helped yourself and your identity, what do you think it would be?
I've never been asked that question before. I don't think this is an original answer. Most immigrants talk about this, but the importance of work ethic. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason that my family came to America is because we knew that our work would pay off. Whereas in Ukraine, you could work your whole life, but because the system is so rigged, because the country is so corrupt, it wouldn't matter. Because that's not how you play the game to win. But in America, it felt like we could actually achieve something if we worked hard. And so when we immigrated, it was really tough. I went from being a child performer that was on commercials and on TV. Like, I'll just be very explicit. I thought I was a shit, okay? At 7, 8, 9 years old, I thought I was the shit, okay? I expected people to treat me like I was a celebrity. And so coming to America, my parents had $20,000. We lived in effectively Section 8 housing, and we were on food stamps for some time and on Social Security. I was on free and reduced lunch for years, okay? And it was always so embarrassing because if you're on free and reduced lunch, you don't have to put your PIN in for your lunch code because there's no money to deduct because it's free. So the kids know who's on free and reduced lunch. And I was always so embarrassed. And so I went from having this glamorous life to being treated as a second-class citizen and being poor. We were poor. Now we're not, thank God. I'm super proud of myself and of my family and everything we've been able to achieve, but that wasn't the reality for us for many years. So work ethic is the biggest lesson I've learned. I've never felt living here in America that there was something I wouldn't be able to accomplish. If you told me next year I want you to make $1 million, Margarita, I would figure out how to do it because it's possible here.
This whole idea of immigrating and moving to a completely different country is just like something that like I can't even fathom. Immigration, I know for a fact, is so hard. Coming to a new country and learning a new language is so difficult. And it just like, I always have an appreciation for people that are immigrants because they really are starting a new life essentially. And it really amazes me that like people can do that.
This reminds me that I need to tell you the to blow or not to blow story. Okay. So English is a very hard language to learn. The first couple of years, I was in third grade, right? Because I was 9. So I started third grade at school. And I went through ESL probably till the end of 5th grade. So I did about 2 years and then I was on my own. And so in 5th grade, we had a science fair where every student was supposed to come up with an experiment and then create like that trifold poster explaining how your experiment works. And so my grandpa helped me put together this experiment where essentially you have a flask, you put baking soda and vinegar in the flask, and when it starts bubbling up, you cover the flask with a balloon and the balloon inflates. So it creates this like inflation. You have a balloon that now inflated. That was the experiment. It literally pointless, has zero application or use in the real world. It just looks cool. Okay. So ESL me decided to title that experiment To Blow or Not to Blow. And so, I have a photo of me from the 5th grade science fair next to my trifold, okay? And in big letters, it says to blow or not to blow. And my teacher took that photo, and I can't imagine. Nobody stopped me, not one adult.
So you'd only find that on a 5th grade science project or in a sorority house, like one of the two, clearly. Like that is, that's amazing. I love the little like, I love like how, my grandma sometimes does this. Like when people don't like fully understand like English and the language itself, like not to make fun of people try to learn English because it's a hard language to learn, but it's just like the little like kinks and like some people like misinterpret things. And I feel like Israelis do this all the time. Like they use like improper phrases to like try and depict things. So I want to get into talking about People Do You Want to Know, because it has become Margarita, I don't listen to other podcasts. I've listened to at least 3 of your episodes already. So you are doing a fantastic job, which I'm sure you know. I want to talk a little bit about, what kind of got you the courage to start the podcast. We both know that starting a podcast takes a lot of courage, right? There's definitely like a point in your time where you're like, why am I doing this? This is embarrassing. I'm going to get a fool of myself. But I think at the end of the day, I think both you and I know it's very rewarding in many different ways. So I want you to kind of talk about your journey as a podcaster and how it led you to start People Do You Want to Know.
I really empathize with the embarrassing thing because I think about that all the time. Like if 2 years from now I listen to an episode I put out, will I be like mortified at what I said? Because sometimes I speak very matter-of-factly and it's just like, Margarita, why did you think that? Anyway, so during the pandemic, I had a lot of spare time, like many people. So I wanted to explore more creative hobbies and outlets because as someone who worked in entertainment and now works a full-time corporate career, I just didn't feel like I had a creative outlet. Like when I lived in New York City pre-pandemic, I would do improv comedy classes and I did a musical improv class and I felt like I had a creative outlet. And then the pandemic started and I didn't really have that. So I wanted to figure out, like, would it be a YouTube channel? Would it be podcasting? So I started learning about all these different things, like what kind of camera would you get? How do you cut videos? What's exciting to people about what they see? How do you speak so that you keep people's attention for a long amount of time? And I definitely found that podcasting was the better medium for me because the short form clips that you see on Instagram Reels and TikToks, it just felt kind of vain. And in order to gain a massive popularity, you had to kind of stoop to the lowest common denominator, which I wasn't really willing to do. So I felt like podcasting was the better medium for me. Plus, I already had a leg up because of all the voice acting experience I have. It's easier for me than learning how to, maybe be on camera a certain way or whatnot. So as it pertains to People Do You Want to Know, I had the concept prior to October 7th. About 6 months prior to October 7th, I started thinking about doing a podcast. And what I was up against was, how is this markedly different from what anyone else has to offer in the Jewish podcast landscape? And then 2, how do I, a person who is not a social media influencer or has a large following, put a stake or take a piece of the pie of people's attention in my niche? And so for 6 months, I kind of worked out the premise and the concept and whatever. And it wasn't coming together. I didn't feel like I would offer anything new. And then October 7th happened, and I realized that, myself included, Jews wanted to connect with each other and feel like they were doing Jewish things, hearing Jewish ideas, hearing from Jewish people. People were flocking to events in New York City where I live. And so I went back to the drawing board and really filled in the gaps on like, okay, what's my value prop? So today, People Do You Want to Know is an encyclopedia of remarkable Jewish people. If you think about it, a book, an encyclopedia, and every page is dedicated to a remarkable Jew, each episode is effectively what your page in that book would say. And I interview and bring on the most diverse Jewish people under the umbrella of one podcast, irrespective of their level of observance of Judaism, their position on Israel, etc. I've had Rabbi Manis Friedman on, who is a very observant rabbi, as well as a strong supporter of Israel. And then I've had an anti-Zionist academic on, who thinks that Israel is committing apartheid and genocide. It's a huge privilege to hear the points of view of all these amazing people, acclaimed people, intelligent people, people who are captivating speakers, and have the ability to share that and offer learning to a broader Jewish audience. So that's kind of our niche. No one has brought the guests that I've brought on the podcast. I really tried to look for unique things. Some of the guests that I'm looking forward to that are really unique are the last living Jewish gangster. He's 86 years old. I interviewed him. He speaks like this. Hey, sweetheart, how are you?
Love that.
Yeah. As well as, soldiers who fought in Gaza, Holocaust survivors, and behavioral scientists, financial wellness coaches, people that we otherwise don't really hear about that are actually very interesting and offer incredible value and advice and learning if you listen to the episode. So I try to take a unique angle. And also I'm cognizant of the fact that after October 7th, people are really exhausted talking about Israel, talking about death and grief and sadness. So People Do You Want to Know is more of a place for joy and learning and comfort. Like you're coming to listen to your cousin talk about something cool that she learned. What does that sound like? As opposed to, let's talk about hostages. Let's talk about Israel. Some of those episodes, of course, are that way. Like when I bring in a soldier from Gaza, I'm not going to not ask those things. That's why we bring him on. But a lot of the episodes are centered around what we call Jewish joy.
I love the message of your podcast, first of all, that it's encyclopedia. It's supposed to be informative. It's supposed to teach people about, a specific person and what they're like. And I definitely see a lot of, similarities between our podcasts, right? Mine's more personal brand focus and how they market themselves and more, we could call it businessy, right? Yours is a little bit, I feel like maybe like a little bit more broad. But one thing I do want to touch on is the diversity of your podcast. And I actually yesterday listened to your episode with Jack Leff, and I was absolutely like blown away. And I don't know if it was for good or for bad, but I just want to tell everybody, and I'm the same way. Like before, when I started doing this podcast, like I wanted to focus a lot on Israel because it's a hot topic, blah, blah, blah. But now people are sick of it. I really think people are sick of it. And I'm kind of sick of it. It's hard for me to, talk about Israel every day and whatever. And like, of course, I'm a devout Zionist and I love Israel and I love to talk about it. But I think one of the really important things that us Zionists need to hear is that we need to stop being closed-minded. We need to actually hear other people out, and we need to try and create peace, because all this bashing, all this headbutting each other, it's not going to do anything. Listening to that episode with Jack Leff really just opened my eyes to another perspective, and it just taught me how to really think a little bit differently and understand that like this other side might have some similarities and commonalities between, the two sides. And I really think that there is no other podcast out there that has done something like this. I think you guys even acknowledge at the end of the episode, like there's a lot of stuff to like disagree on and whatever, but you guys really maintained a very civil conversation. I thought it was very productive in my eyes, and I hope you did too. I guess like, what was your overall takeaway from interviewing an anti-Zionist? Like, if you had to, take away one, I guess, skill, something you learned, whatever it is, what was like that biggest takeaway? What really stuck with you, Margarita, after doing that interview with Jack Leff?
So there's definitely more than one thing that has stuck with me and will probably for the rest of my life. And you are correct. I'm the only Jewish podcast to offer a long-form interview with an anti-Zionist. Anti-Zionists are not open to speaking to Jewish or Zionist podcasts because they don't want to, how Jack refers to it as, legitimize that position. They don't want to acknowledge that we could have a point, that we could be true. The reason I was able to get someone like Jack on was because him and I met on the news. We were both asked to speak on a Live Nation segment on the news. And after that, the producer connected us. And when I spoke to him, I told him, I was like, I don't want to debate you. I don't want to change your mind. I don't want to argue. I genuinely want you to uninterrupted talk about your position, because I don't think people like me understand how you think. And that's what's important to me. We don't get why you think the way you think. And I want you to tell me, because I can tell you're smart. Like, he's an incredibly accomplished academic. He's gone through a ton of school. He's really well read. He's a bright guy. So like, how did he come to those beliefs? So whoever is listening, I recommend you listen to the podcast and kind of make your own judgments on whether you agree or disagree with him. You have a point. There are a lot of times where I kept my mouth shut, even though I completely disagreed, or I felt like he misrepresented the reality and I didn't speak up. Because again, it's not a debate. I want to hear his point of view. And the reason he was able to say all the things that he said is because he knew he wouldn't be interrupted or debated. He felt safe. So the thing that stuck with me the most was, one, he genuinely believes he's doing the right thing. Like, he thinks these are the ethical ways to deal with war and conflict, and that if we want to be good Jews, we have to protect the Palestinians. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, he's guilty of committing the logical fallacies and the flipping of the narrative that he so clearly sees Zionists do, but he doesn't know that he's doing it himself. I'll give you an example. We talk about the UN. And in the episode, I say, I don't support the UN because they fund terrorism. And we move on. And then later he says, oh, and to your point that Hamas controls the UN, blah, 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 blah. I never said Hamas controls the UN. I said UN funds terrorism. There's nothing to debate here. There's nothing inflammatory. UN does, in fact, fund terrorism. They have funds allocated to people who commit terrorism. That's just a fact. There's nothing to disagree on. But he took my words and said the UN is controlled by Hamas, which is inflammatory, which is disputable, which is untrue. So that's an example of a behavior that he'd call out from Bibi or Ben Gvir and whatever, but then he just did it himself and didn't realize it. So we're all guilty of committing those logical fallacies and being just wrong. Like, we can all be wrong. And I think the more that we talk to each other, the more we find the humility to acknowledge that in ourselves, and we grow awareness as we talk to people we disagree with. I think it's so important. And I'm so proud that I was able to bring him on and offer this episode.
Yeah. And again, like, another just remarkable thing that you kind of touched on. And from my understanding when listening to the episode, it was like you guys were brought on News Nation to kind of debate each other. And it seemed like he was more prepared than you were. And you didn't want to have a debate, right? Because at the end of the day, we're stubborn. We're not really going to change our opinions. And for you to go from having him on this news network where you guys are debating, where the news, quite frankly, is trying to tear you guys apart. Like, let's be real. Like, News Nation wasn't trying to make you guys friends, but you went out of your way to really say, hey, like, Jack, let's have a podcast episode where you talk and, share your story as an anti-Zionist. And I think that's so cool because nobody else is doing that. Like, there's no other Jewish podcast that is saying, oh yeah, I'm going on the news. I'm gonna get teared to shreds by this guy, and now I'm gonna bring him on my podcast and give him a voice. Like, come on, that's freaking awesome. Like, I have an appreciation for that, and like, really, it amazes me. Like what you're doing with this podcast is super cool. I know we talked a lot about somebody who you didn't relate with at all, like Jack. You obviously anti-Zionist. Obviously, you guys had some commonalities, but I want to ask you about a guest that maybe you related with the most. Which of your guests do you feel like you related to the most, if there is one or maybe a few? And what was that relation like when you were having a conversation?
There are many guests that I relate to because many of them are, frankly, my friends. Whatever, it's not nepotism because that's when you bring in your own family, whatever the friend equivalent of nepotism is. Some of my friends definitely get grandfathered in on the podcast because I love them and I want them to share their story. So one that comes to mind right off the bat is Margot Twito. She's at Margot Explains It All on social media. She's based out of Israel, but she is American and made Aliyah years ago. She focuses on dating, sex, and relationships, and she has a podcast of her own, and she has an Instagram page that she runs. She's like a pretty viral content creator, I would say. She's like well known in Israel. People recognize her on the street. Her and I have never met in person, and we're, despite this, very close friends. And I just relate to her on the dating front because everything she says, even though she's in Israel, dating in a different market, we still have the same struggles and pains. And her and I always confide in each other on like dating nightmares. So that's the first one. The second one that I relate to, or I better put the second one that I am really inspired by, is Rabbi Manis Friedman. He actually lives in Minnesota, in St. Paul, Minnesota, for part of the year. I think now he's mostly based out of New York and Florida, but he does come to Minneapolis and Minnesota very frequently. There's just something about him. Like even screen to screen, you could feel this man just has like a depth to him. Like, whew. You talk to him and you can see he's seen stuff. Like there's something about him that's so spiritual and deep, and talking to him, he's a very clear and effective communicator, and he just breaks it down, okay? Proportionality on October 7th, here's what I mean by that. Casualties, here's what I mean by that. Who is a civilian? Here's how that's defined. He just lays down the law very clearly, very effectively, mic drop, gets out of there. And I'm really inspired by that. And if I could learn to speak as eloquently and as captivatingly as Rabbi Manis Friedman, even half as good as him, I know I will be excellent.
I mean, I just want to say, first of all, you are a very good communicator. Like I can tell that questions you ask are extremely deep and like very clear. So don't discount yourself there. But I just want to say again, listeners, these are two amazing episodes that you should listen to. People do want to know, again, is a very, the podcast is extremely different from mine, yet we have very similar intentions and goals. And I highly recommend to anybody who wants to have another Jewish podcast in their podcast rotation. Like this is a great podcast to listen to because Margarita is out here killing it. And as I mentioned before, she's got Modi, she got Rabbi Manis Friedman. She had this anti-Zionist Jew episode, which I highly recommend everybody listens to. And it's just amazing what she's doing out here. And I want to go into a little bit more about how her personal brand kind of ties into this podcast. So Margarita, as you mentioned before, you have a corporate career, but you also have this kind of podcast that you want to brand. These are two completely separate entities. You have a lot of work, you have a lot of experience in product management. I want to ask you, how do you balance your professional brand and your podcast brand? Do you see any overlap and intertwining, or do you keep these brands completely separate at all times?
They're separate. They have nothing to do with each other. Although I will say I work for an Israeli tech company now, and a lot of my coworkers are Jewish and Israeli. So I do get to promote the podcast to them and share the episodes with them, which is nice. But by and large, they are completely separate things. It's like you got the 9 to 5 and then you got the 5 to 9 kind of thing. And maybe one day people do want to know will be something big and I can do it full time. But right now we're not anywhere near that. And also podcasts don't make a lot of money unless you're like Dax Shepard or something with Armchair Expert. You're not in the podcast gig because you're trying to be a millionaire. Bradley Tusk, one of my guests on the podcast, actually said that he's an incredible venture capitalist and political consultant. He has a podcast he's had for years. And he was like, Margarita, if you're going to do a podcast, know that it's not for the money. So yeah, for now they're separate. And it's so interesting because I do very much have a reputation in the industry. People know me in ad tech, which is what I work in. But it doesn't always come up, the podcasts. But when they do ask, like, what have you been up to, outside of work? It's like I light up. And my excitement talking about the podcast, like, is so much greater than anything I could tell them about work.
Yeah. I again, like going back to, if there are listeners that want to start a podcast or think about starting a podcast, it is absolutely not for the money. Like, honestly, I'm doing this as a hobby. And this is not, if you want to start a podcast, like, you're going to have to make an investment, and your return on investment is connections, and you get to talk about this in job interviews or talk about it to people on the street. Like, it is so that you have to have a lot of passion for it. And it's really the people that like have the most passion have the best podcasts. When you initially reached out to me and we had like a little intro call, you talked about how the work-life balance is definitely a little bit difficult, and that you have to kind of sit on the couch for, an entire day on the weekend, sacrifice one day out of the weekend, and edit your podcast, edit the episodes, whatever. Why don't you talk a little bit about like what that sacrifice is like, and kind of like what other trade-offs you have to balance between having a podcast and having a real, corporate 9-to-5 job?
It's hard work. Thank you for recognizing that, first of all, because a lot of people think that it's just like fun, and they don't realize that I spend probably like 10 to 20 hours a week working on this. And I'm not even doing a great job, I would say, in some sense. For example, my skill set is really recording the episode, being a good host, producing the episode, making high production quality, the episode itself. All the social media stuff, I hate it. I'm not good at it. It's not really my skill set. I don't like making reels, okay? I think it's stupid. I hate it. So, and that's part of promoting the podcast. So the Instagram that we run, every week I post a promotional reel for the episode that comes out, as well as a set of stories. And every week it's like, I have to sit down and make one 15-second reel. That'll take me like 4 hours. You know what I mean? So I haven't figured it out quite right just yet. In terms of the podcast work itself, I do all of the editing, everything myself. I've tried outsourcing it to the guys on Fiverr. They use AI tools, and those AI tools kind of lose the humanity. Like, sometimes you need a pause for effect. The AI tool won't sense that. So cut everything together. It'll be really quick, and there's no human emotion, dramatic effect, nothing. So by editing all myself, I kind of can bring that personality into the episode and help the guest really shine, so that they get a sense of, here's how the guest talks. Here's when the guest needed to pause to think about something. Here's when they had a really quick answer. Those things make a difference in the production quality. But yeah, when I first started, I would spend like a whole day on the weekend, start to finish, editing stuff, recording, making reels, like the whole 9 yards. Now I've got down to a better system where I probably can get everything done like in a couple of hours a week. And so I kind of batch record, and then I batch schedule them. So right now I have probably 3 episodes already ready to be released. They're already scheduled on my podcasting platform. So I don't really need to do anything for the next 3 weeks. They're done. So I can record the next 3 and then the next 3. So I do it in that batching process. It's really time-consuming work, but I really enjoy sitting down to edit.
It's so funny because I'm kind of like the exact opposite. Like, the reels are like, they're sometimes a pain in the ass to make, but like, I love making the reels, and the episodes, like, I just like, they're like, when I edit them, it's fine because like I have like an AI tool and whatever, it helps me a little bit. But it's so funny that like we kind of have like opposite preferences, and we're still making the podcast work. So it's just like it's really like, podcasting is so time consuming. But at the end of the day, I think at least it's worth it, because my alternative is like playing Xbox or something, right? I'd rather be doing something meaningful with my life than playing Xbox, which I still do, by the way. But just saying, like, podcasting, it's very time consuming. But at the end of the day, like, you reap the benefits of it from, people talking about it, people saying, texting you like, great episode, whatever. And that's worth more than like, really, really a lot of other things. So again, I totally agree with you. Like it's definitely a pain in the ass, but like when the finished product comes out, it's great.
I want to mention one other thing about podcasting. So you live in Minnesota. I don't think you experience this as much, but I'm in New York City where every night there's like 4 Jewish events to choose from. So a big part of podcasting for me is working the room and going to all these events and being like, hi, my name is Margarita. I run People Do You Want to Know podcast. And then they're like, what's People Do You Want to Know? And I'm like, so glad you asked. And I do that every night. So a lot of the time that I spent in the podcasting process, quote unquote, is really just schmoozing and making people aware of who I am. And now when I go to these events, they're like, oh, you're the podcast girl. And I'm like, yes, I am. Tell everybody.
Networking is another big part of it. And, it takes a lot to get somebody on your podcast. Like, even though it's, you're essentially doing somebody a favor by promoting them, but still it takes a lot of, you have to pitch. This is a sales job. You have to pitch your podcast. Like, somebody's not going to sit down with you for an hour and talk to you if you don't have some value to add to them. But again, going back to this networking thing, right? We talk about supply chain. Right? Supply chain major. I was a supply chain major. You were a supply chain major. So let's take this idea of a Jewish supply chain network for you, Margarita, since you know a lot of Jewish people. How has your Jewish supply chain network, aka your Jewish network, helped enhance your brand throughout your professional career and your podcasting career?
So interestingly, ad tech, the industry that I work in, has a ton of Jews. So I think it's a kind of a coincidence that my network for work is a lot of Jews. So it's not that they're helping me because I'm Jewish and they're Jewish. It's because there's just more Jews in the ad tech ecosystem in New York City. Those are the first people to support me when I launch a Jewish podcast. They're the people to share it with their friends. I have had coworkers that I worked with at Amazon, a Jewish coworker of mine, who came to an event that I moderated a panel at an event in New York City, and he came and supported me. And the average age of that event was like 28, and he was like 60. And he still showed up because he's like, I wanted to be there. I wanted to hear you speak. It was important to me. And it meant so much that he showed up. And it means so much when my work colleagues are excited about my podcast. Like, I had one colleague who was like, make sure to tell me when the episode with Modi comes out so I can listen to it because I'm obsessed with Modi. Yeah. In the professional sphere, I'm grateful to say that I'm connected with all sorts of people. And I haven't had a time in my career where I had to really rely on like the Jewish network card. You know what I mean? Like, oh, yeah, we come from the same, whatever. We went to the same sleepaway camp. Can you give me a referral at your company? I never had to do that, thankfully. I don't know if it would even work. I will say a big part of my network is predominantly men because tech in general is a male-dominated field. So a lot of the people I'm connected to are like 50-year-old men who are like VPs and executives at ad tech companies. And if I ever need some mentorship or help, when I have questions about how to, make an investment in my product or how to think about the right vendor to choose for something, I know I can call them up and they'll kind of tell me where all the bodies are buried. But that has nothing to do with the Jewish front. I do think more important than ever, especially post October 7th, Jewish people need to branch out. Like, sure, we need to stick together, but we need to have a lot of connections that are not Jewish that support us and support Israel.
I love that. So final question for you, Margarita, before we wrap up. What is your one networking tip that you have to get people to come on your show, get people in your product management business, get people to buy your product, invest in your product, whatever it is? What's like your one networking tip?
I have more than one because I studied this in grad school. Can I give more than one?
Give more than one. Go ahead.
Okay. So first of all, business cards work. I know it's considered old school. Put your face on it. Make it look cool. They look slick. Okay. I've never had somebody take my business card and not be impressed because of the novelty. Like, you really stand out. even if they didn't like you, they'll remember you because you were that one person that gave them a business card. You know what I mean? So that's my first networking tip. The second is when you reach out to strangers, always have a question. Don't send that, I was wondering if you would be interested. Send that, would you be interested? Are you open to a conversation? What do you think? Also, there are two camps. I'm in camp, never send thank you in advance in your email. Like, that's very presumptive that you think you should thank me in advance, that you think anytime someone sends me thank you in advance, they will never hear from me, okay, out of principle. I'm in that camp. I know some people disagree, but my rule with networking is never say thank you in advance. Just say thank you. Oh, this is an interesting one. This is advanced networking, okay? So research shows, psychological research, that people are more inclined to respond to you if the answer is no than if the answer is yes. So if you've been reaching out to people and they're ignoring you, they're not getting back to your cold outreach, if you reach out to them and ask, are you no longer interested in this project? They're more likely to respond because they'll be like, no, of course I'm interested. Sorry, things have been so busy. And then you get a response out of them, as opposed to asking, are you interested in this project? That came from a book called Never Split the Difference, which I really recommend. It's from a hostage negotiator. How fitting in this time. So that's another good one I like. And then my favorite networking tip is, if you look on my LinkedIn, I got a ton of recommendations from people. And when recruiters look at my profile, they're like, who's this girl with a bunch of recommendations? Here's how I do it. So anytime I work with someone on a project, I like ping them or email them on the side and I say, hey, can I ask you for a favor? If you've enjoyed working with me, would you mind leaving like a 1-2 sentence LinkedIn review? It would really help me out. And that way I just kind of amassed a bunch of reviews. Another good one I like to do is, hey, can I ask you for a favor? If you've liked working with me, do you mind sending my manager a quick message to let him know? Thanks so much.
Wow.
Those are my tips.
So simple yet so effective. And I think with all these tips, the main kind of message behind it is be proactive, right? When you want to build your brand as a person, you got to be proactive. You can't sit back there, relax, hope things falls in your lap. Doesn't happen. Again, Margarita, awesome networking tips, but also just the segment in general, amazing. Loved hearing about your podcast. Loved hearing about your acting career. Before we wrap things up, where can people find you on social media?
Thanks so much for having me, David. It's been a real pleasure. Where can you find me? Well, of course, you can find me on Instagram at People Do Wanna Know. You can listen to People Do Wanna Know wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, whatever. We're there in all our glory. And my personal Instagram is at Marge_Simpson. And I'm also on LinkedIn, where you could see those dozens of recommendations or whatever I've amassed in the time that I've been working. And yeah, it's been a real treat. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, we really want to thank Margarita. Make sure we follow her on the socials. Also, make sure we're following Schmoozing Time on the socials so you can see the highlights of these episodes. And till next time, keep schmoozing.